Good morning. Welcome to another episode of Papa's Workshop. These are for Adam, Brady, Luke, and Brenna, and believe it or not, we have got another birthday. Today is Luke's birthday. And for that special occasion, we're going to talk about specialty planes, planes that are made for specific purposes. The first one we're going to talk about is a dado plane. A dado is a groove that is wider than it is deep, and it goes across the grain, so it goes across the wood like this. I don't know if you can see that on these. There's some shallow dados there, and what the dado does for you, if this is the board and this is our dado, is another board could come in and fit into that and lock in. So if that's a chest of drawers, the weight of the drawer, that's locked in. And a lot of times what you see on the 18th century furniture is that there'll be a dovetail like that. The dovetail keeps the side from falling out, and the dado keeps the weight of the drawer. Has a mechanical strength. So in order to cut that dado, you've got to have a blade. These are you see, this has got a blade's only this wide, and this cutter up front, I can get that out of there. See, it's got these two little cutters on the front, and that's to score as you're going across the wood. That scores those fibers, cuts those fibers ahead of the cutter that's the width of the dado. So anytime you're doing cross cuts, any of these planes, when you're going across the grain, you got to have something that's going to shear those fibers ahead of the cutter, or it's going to rip it out, and you're going to get the tear out. So these come in various sizes. See, this is a little wider, and then this one is about 3/4. So these are dedicated dado planes. They only cut this width. And these have a depth control with this little thumb screw here and this rider. Some of them don't have depth controls, and there's no fence because it's going across the grain. What you have to do is clamp a board. You have to clamp a board on there and use that edge of that board as your guide across. So they don't have fences. A true dado plane does not have a fence. Now there's some variations in that. This could be considered a dado plane. It's got no fence. It's at a fixed width, but it doesn't have anything to score the fiber, so it's not really meant to do a dado across the grain. This is a specialty joinery plane. It's called a shoulder plane. And it's meant to do the mortise and tendon. Oh, here's one here. So on the tendon, this can plane across the shoulder. You've got this flat machine surface on it, and that holds the guide so you can make that exactly 90. So it's got a really low angle. Remember our discussion on the planes, the angle of attack. This has got a really low with a bevel up, so it will cut the cross grain pretty well. So that's what this is, basically a specialty plane just for doing these tendon joints. And some you can, if it's these come in wider. This is a medium size. They come in a smaller and a larger size. If your tendon's not as big, you can help shave the thickness of your tenon with this as well. The thing about doing the end grain is one of the problems doing an end grain. If this is the end, this is your board, and the grain's going this way, and it doesn't matter which direction you're playing in, because the grain, you're doing the ends of the straws, right? So let's say you're going this way. Well, what will happen is these fibers right at the very end will want to tear out. So one of the ways you can fight that, that's the board, is to cut just a little bit of a chamfer. It doesn't have to be much. I mean, less than a 1/16 of an inch. And that gives it a group of fibers then, and it won't tend to tear out. Now, if the joint's going to show, you don't want to do that, but so you can plane in both directions. That's a little harder to get a nice clean joint all the way across, but that's one of the secrets of trying to prevent the blowout in the end. So that's the shoulder plane, and it comes in different widths. You also have here's a more modern day. This is still probably close to 100 years old, but this is a metal dado plane, and this is a Stanley, and they come in the widths from almost an inch to down to about a quarter, and it has a depth control with this, and if you can see the cutters, there's this little piece right here is you control the depth, and that's slits for doing slits the fibers ahead of the cutter, and these are retractable if you're going to go with the grain. Let's see, and here's another. Well, the next there sort of blurs the lines, but you've got the next planes that are kind of similar is the rabbit planes, and a rabbit is a dado basically at the edge of the board. And these can go with the grain or against the grain. Like if you're going to do the rabbet around the edge of the board for a frame and panel. But also you can have a board joined like that, or sometimes you can have them do a double rabbet. So each board has a rabbet. So since those go with the grain, sometimes they don't necessarily need those slitters in front, and this is basically a rabbit plane, not a dado plane, and it has a depth control. It also has a fence, so you can control how, since it's going like that, you can control how far in that goes. So the rabbit planes tend to have the fence and a depth control. And this is a little more of a, this isn't as precision as this is. So this is a little more rougher. But a lot of times the joinery, you don't really care so much about the tear out as much, because it's all going to be hidden. This is a skew. The blade is at an angle there, which makes it easier to push. And again, it has the depth control and a fence. And this is a more modern day rabbet plane. It's called a skew rabbet plane. And here's some more of the skew. Now this is not really a dado. It's more of a rabbet because it doesn't have anything in front to cut the fibers. So this is meant to cut either a rabbet or a groove that goes with the grain. And again, those come in separate widths. Here's a little wider one that's skewed. And sometimes they can be owner made. This is an owner made one, and the depth control is just this little block of wood, and they got just a fence nailed on. So just to do the rabbits. What else? A couple other variations of the rabbit plane. You can have a full-size plane that's like this size, have the blade goes right to the very edge. This is a block plane, but it can trim rabbits because the blade goes right up to the edge, so you can cut right up to the edge. So you have sort of a bench rabbit plane. It could come in bigger sizes. In say the 18th and 19th centuries, the rabbit plane was called a philister, and they were fancy. This is not particularly fancy. They come in a much more elaborate decorations, because these were sort of a premier plane at the time. See, it has the fence is adjusted with these screw knobs. It's got a depth control here in the middle that's controlled with this thumb screw over here, and of course it has just the single width blade. So these were quite honored tool back in those days. And then Stanley came out with a combination plane. This is a 45, and it's supposed to do just about everything. It's a rabbit plane, it's a dado plane, you can use it as a regular plane. It has a fence, it has this doesn't have a blade in it right now. It comes with all these different blades. So you got all these different widths that you can put in there, and then these two pieces can adjust to whatever width of your blade is, and it has cutters up ahead of it to score the thing to do the dados or go a rabbit across grain. Then you can do other profiles. It's got these other shapes. It's got beads, tongue and groove, which we'll talk about in a minute. So it was supposed to do just about everything. I also make a 55, which does even more. They have even more cutters than I have, and you can get longer rods for longer fences. So that about does it for. Oh, here's another variation of this is called a bull nose. The blade is right up front, so you can do a stop dado. A stop dado is one that doesn't go all the way through. So let's say it goes this far and it stops right here. So you would use this to trim up that last little bit. But again, you got to have different widths of that to be able to make it work for you. Okay. And it's in that same stance is tongue and groove. It's not really a dado, but you're cutting a groove. It's usually narrower and deeper than the dado is wider than it is deep. So a tongue and groove that's the groove, and that's the tongue. And these could be even across the grain. You can have a groove in a board like that, and then another board comes and fits in there. And you can have matched. Now the 45 will do the tongue and the groove. You can have dedicated matched set of planes, two planes that are matched to do this very thing, and that's what these are here. This is a match set, and this is a very narrow, this is like about a 1/8 inch, just where this metal strip is. That's going to cut your groove. And then this blade right here has got the matching tongue part of it. This blade is, see, the blade's got a split in it. And those come in different widths all the way. I've got up to these big ones like that. And these are match sets for doing the tongue and groove, which you can do with the 45, or if you've got a very narrow dado plane, you can cut the tongue part of it, or the groove part of it, and then you can use the other rabbit planes to do the tongues. The other planes I should have talked about earlier were the block planes, and those could actually be considered bench planes. They're small versions of the bench planes, and they're really handy for trimming up the last little things. They're not going to make things really flat because they're very short, right? We got the curve thing, but they come in various sizes and different angles. This is if you can see how low that angle is on that, this is really good for end grain, whereas like this one, these two here are a little higher up. They don't do the end grain so well, but they're good for trimming. There's also got what they call a router plane. See the blades right here, it's got a depth control, and what that's made to do is to trim the bottom of you can trim the bottom of a dado down a little deeper, or if you've got just a little a blind dado in the end of a board, this can finish that up. It comes different blade widths, and here's a small one. And both on that one, this has got the blade turned around the other way for the last thing I was doing it, but these are really useful for trimming just the depth of something, like even a blind dovetails, which we'll talk about another day. You'll be able to get a nice equal depth on them. I think for the planes, here's a dedicated miter plane. This thing is very heavy. It's got the blade is skewed. It's at a very, very low angle, bevel up, and it's made to do just the end grain. And you put it in what they call a chute board. So this just hooks on the end of the bench. And you just run that right through, just like that. And your board, you would have a board against your fence. This is set up to do a 45, so you would just run that through to trim up the miter. So that's a miter plane. After you've sawed it on the miter saw that we did before, then you would trim it up with this miter plane. I hope that does it. As we get through all of this, we'll start doing some projects, but right now I've been working on the deck, so we've got a few more weeks of that probably. And grandmother's been watching these things too, and she thinks I have too many tools. That can't be. You can never have too many tools.